Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Europe's role in the world depends fundamentally on its unity abroad. Yet rising populism and diverging national priorities continue to threaten that foundation. Our next session, United Within, Stronger Beyond, the future of European cohesion, will explore how Europe can maintain public trust, overcome fragmentation, and reinforce its ability to act on the global stage. It is my pleasure to hand over to Alisa Vogt, my dear colleague and Program Director for International Affairs at Körber-Stiftung, who will host this upcoming session. Alisa, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch. Also, welcome back to our audience at home. I'm delighted to kick off this afternoon program of the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum with a fantastic panel. Delighted that we have two parliamentarians with us today. Joining from Kiev is Yelena Yanchenko. She is member of the Verkhovna Rada of the Parliament of Ukraine. Joining us from, let's say, the other side of Unter den Linden Boulevard is Anton Hofreiter. He is a member of the German Bundestag and the chairman of the Committee on European Affairs. Very welcome. Regularly talking about power and purpose in her new podcast, today talking about Ukraine and European disunity or unity, is Natalie Tocci. She's the director of the Istituto Affari Internazionali in Rome and professor of practice at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Bologna.
Thank you.
I like this new way of introducing yourself. As you've seen in your little agenda flyer, in this panel we originally wanted to focus on the future of European cohesion. But of course, due to the latest developments, and since we have the privilege of having a Ukrainian parliamentarian with us, we will first of all look at the so-called peace plan, the 28-point peace plan. That also explains that the composition of our panel has changed, as Belén Martínez Carbonell, she's the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, had to stay in Brussels. She sends her regards and very much regrets that she's not here today. But the amazing thing is that Tristan Aureau, he is the chief of the planning staff at the French Foreign Ministry, has agreed to join us. Wonderful to have you all. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we heard a lot about the 28-point plan, which is already a 19-point plan, if I'm informed correctly. News are breaking basically by the hour today. We've heard a lot about it. The news broke last week first. Some called it a Russian wish list, and that accepting it would mean a de facto surrender for Ukraine. Then, of course, on Sunday, negotiation started on an alternative. So without further ado, I would ask you, Halina, can you summarize the Ukrainian position on this plan?
Yes, well, first of all, many thanks for this invitation to speak in front of such an audience. It's a big pleasure. Secondly, actually answering your question about the so-called 28 plan, drafted obviously in Kremlin, and it's a shame that we were communicating this. We've been communicated this plan by US. I don't even know if I should comment on this plan or not, because it's absolutely ridiculous and it's absolutely obvious. I've already talked a lot about the Kremlin's idea of so-called trading the land. In my opinion, and I'm talking not as a politician, but as a person, as mother of two children, we cannot talk of any trading of the land. When we are talking about trading land, it's not about, square kilometers here, square kilometers there. We're talking about cities and villages with people, with actually families living there. After Bucha, not only Ukrainians, but the whole world have seen what Russian occupation means. And can you imagine that we would like give away our villages, our cities, our homes without a fight to Russians? What for? For them to be tortured? For them to be kidnapped by Russians, by Russian occupants? That is why in Ukraine, the reaction on this so-called 28 points plan was, it's nothing to discuss even. And therefore, we are very happy that we have such a friend and such an ally as Germany. For us, it's very important to have not intermediaries, but allies. Because when we are talking about this so-called Russian-Ukrainian war, or I prefer to actually call it an unprovoked war of aggression that Russia has started, we are talking now not only about the security of Ukraine. We are talking about security of Europe. And it's not abstract anymore. So Ukraine is not an abstract shield of abstract security of abstract Europe. Now, actually, even in Germany, German citizens can feel how unprovoked war of aggression started by Russia affects their lives. Recently, we have drafted a joint article with Minister Nathaniel Liminsky. And I was very lucky because he had a few extra hours to discuss this article when he was sitting in the airport of Munich, because the airport was closed because of some kind of drones flying around the airport. So now we are talking not about abstract security, we are talking about like real security. And I believe it's quite clear that there were some Russian forces standing behind those basically situation in Munich airport. So now, and actually it's a very funny story because the joint article that was drafted by me and Minister Liminsky was about co-production and cooperation between defense industries of Ukraine and Germany. So now, thanks to Russians, we have a fantastic article about the co-production of Ukraine and German defense industry. It could be a joke, but no, it's a joke that contains only half of the joke. Therefore, just to sum up the position of Ukraine, for many months, for years, we've been continuing saying that there should be no talks on Ukraine without Ukraine. And now I believe that we have to rephrase it, because there should be no talks about security in Europe without Europe. Because now Russia behavior, Russia aggressive basically actions affect not only Ukraine but also Europe. You obviously see it in Baltic countries, Finland, Sweden see it, but now even Germany, even like here, far in the west of Europe, Russia affects and threats basically the lives of citizens of Germany. And therefore, we have to be united. Therefore, we have to be like, a single front in this kind of negotiations. We have to make sure that peace is sustainable and is fair. Otherwise, it will be not a negotiations, but just a shame, something like Minsk, so-called Minsk talks that did not end the Russian war in Ukraine, but only gave Putin extra time to come back with more tanks, with more soldiers, and more atrocities against civilians.
If I may follow up on that, Halina, you said you didn't want to comment on the plan itself, but a lot has happened, of course, since last week. New negotiations, the delegations will meet today in Abu Dhabi. What are the options that President Zelensky now has?
Well, for us, it's very important that, once again, that this peace is fair and sustainable. If we give away something to Putin, it doesn't look like a punishment to aggressor. It looks like a present, a gift to an aggressor. And what do you do if you are, if you receive a gift? You believe that this is the behavior that is good. This is behavior that is appreciated by others. So you come back with more aggression. And I'm afraid that Ukraine will not be an only victim of aggression the next time Putin comes to the west of Russia. Therefore, it's absolutely obvious for us that there should be no Ukrainian cities and villages given away voluntarily to Putin. There can be no discussion about Ukrainian foreign policy because Ukraine is a sovereign country. I believe you would not want anyone to tell Germany what kind of foreign policy to choose because you're a sovereign country, Ukraine is a sovereign European country. So it's absolutely obvious. For us, it's obvious that there should be no limits on the size of Ukrainian armies or the kind of the weapon that we can produce. I believe that it's of a joint interest that Ukraine actually becomes stronger in terms of defense. And it's once again a joint interest of the whole Europe, not only Ukraine. Because now Russia threats not only Ukraine, but also global security, but like European security to be more precious.
Thank you, Alina. And this is my segue over to you, Natalie. The Kremlin has already said that it did not like the European proposal for an alternative for the plan or an amendment. We've seen several unsuccessful rounds so far of peace talks to end the war. Why would it be different this time?
Okay, so let me say, I think there are two premises and two conclusions, two possible scenarios. The two premises, I think, were implicit in what Halina was saying. Premise number one, the 28-point plan is a Russian plan that very skillfully succeeded in playing into, let's say, dynamics in Washington. It is very clear that obviously the Russians are far more skilled and perhaps far more knowledgeable than we are in terms of the makeup, let's say, of the current US administration. So that's premise number one. Premise number two, Ukraine will not capitulate, not quote unquote only because this is a bad plan. So it's not a question of Ukraine should not capitulate, but Ukraine will not capitulate because actually, and this is something that I think is very rarely stressed enough, actually Ukraine's bargaining power today, alongside that of Europe, is higher compared to what it was prior to the Trump administration. For the very simple reason that the Trump administration has been scaling back support for Ukraine. As we know, with the exception of intelligence and a few other bits and bobs, but at the moment there is no US support for Ukraine. There are weapons that are bought by Europeans and sent to Ukrainians. So actually the US does not have the power to impose capitulation on Ukraine. And I think this is an extremely important point. This leads me to two possible scenarios coming to your question or conclusion. Conclusion number one, which is obviously the one that we're attempting now, is essentially a repeat of Groundhog Day. We've seen it after the Oval Office meeting. We saw it after Alaska. Basically, disaster is looming because, again, thanks to the skill of Russia to play in and with the US administration, you have a US administration that tilts towards Russia. Ukrainians, together with Europeans, succeed in, let's say, mitigating the damage and partly rowing back from the disaster, and then in a month, 2 months, 3 months' time, we're going to be back at it again. So that's, in a sense, scenario number one. And I'm not saying it's unrealistic. So far, this is what has been happening. But I think we should entertain the fact that there may be another scenario. And the other scenario is that the dynamics within the US administration suggest that actually it is one faction that is going to win the day, and that faction is the one that is closest to Russia. In that scenario, I think that Europeans should go to the United States, thank profusely President Trump for his unrelenting efforts, and kindly ask him to step aside. Given that what he would be able to achieve is certainly not peace, it is not even capitulation, and therefore, as I said, thanking him profusely, basically asking him to step to one side, possibly having the generosity of heart of continuing intelligence cooperation, and the rest we Europeans, together with Ukrainians, can deal with.
So Natalie just gave a recommendation on how to behave going forward. Tristan, with you, I would like to look back as the EU, the E3, the UK, and Italy secured a seat at the table, at the negotiating table, basically last minute. But the shock of being sidelined beforehand was quite severe. So, what is your analysis of why the EU had so little weight in this?
Well, I think we still have to know the full story of what happened last week in terms of where the leak was coming from and how it's been maneuvered and everything that's behind it. So I would just be cautious as to what exactly took place and led to the publication of that so-called plan, as was mentioned at first. But putting that aside, I think, and it's been referred to by Natalie, it's not a complete surprise in its content, in the sense that what we've seen with President Zelensky in February in the Oval Office, what we've seen in Alaska, I mean, we've had a series of episodes in which we've seen similar patterns at play. And I think that there's been a high level of engagement, not only by the E3, but by European leaders to try and work extremely hard with our Ukrainian counterparts and US counterparts to actually voice European concerns, because I could not echo more what's been said at the beginning, namely that what's taking place at the moment in Ukraine is certainly of utmost importance indeed for Ukraine, but for Europe as a whole. And I think that in this respect, the engagement at the highest level in Europe is certainly key. So let's see what's going to take place in the coming days. What happened in the past 48 hours is high-level engagement to try and not reject that plan, but actually support basically negotiating efforts in a sense that would integrate key Ukrainian and European concerns. So that's been the work being carried out, with a key point that any peace in Ukraine cannot amount to a capitulation of Ukraine. That's as simple as that. So now your question is referring to Europeans. I think that what the lesson we should draw from those past few days is that there is leverage in the hands of Europeans that needs to be played much more forcefully. It's the case with sanctions, it's the case with frozen assets, it's the case with financial support. As Natalie was saying, now financial support to Ukraine is relying on European member states. So this is certainly key, and I think that Europeans need to regain much more agency in using those leverage for what actually affects their core security interests. Because when you read in the plan that it's about military bases in Poland, when you read that it's about the US possibly mediating between NATO and Russia, I mean, you realize that what's behind it is the long-standing Russian demands that have been voiced by President Putin in December 21, for instance, in withdrawing basically the way NATO is being deployed and the core security interest of the eastern flank of NATO. So all of this is not entirely new, but shows very deeply that this touches core European interests. So now, in terms of scenario, just to echo what Natalie was saying, I think we should and we are engaging forcefully in the discussion to voice European concerns, but we should also take seriously what this signals in terms of intentions, orientations from parts of the US administration, not all of it, but parts of it. And we've been focusing on Ukraine, but when you look at this list of last week, you see things about normalization between US and Russia. Economically speaking, you see elements on the Arctic, and you see many other things that do echo, things that are much larger than Ukraine, and that's pretty concerning. So I think on the European side, we need to get more agency through our leverage and accelerate massively what we've been doing in terms of strengthening our defense spending and defense capacities, because the time may come much sooner than expected where we're in an even tougher situation.
Leverage is the perfect keyword for my next question to Anton Hofreiter. I would like to turn to the question of the frozen assets, as the negotiations have put some fresh complications actually on this proposal of the EU to use the frozen assets. The US proposal from last week said they should be turned into an investment platform handled by Washington, with 50% of the profits going to the US. The European proposal now said they should remain frozen until Russia compensates damage in Ukraine. As the foreign minister, Aureau, said this morning, it's urgent for the EU to decide on how to deal with this question, as the financing for Ukraine is going to come to the end at the end of the first quarter of next year. So how does this talk and these negotiations on a possible peace deal influence this decision-making on the EU level now?
Yeah, thanks a lot also for invitation to me. And first of all, also on the plan, I think that I totally agree with what you said, Natalie, because as US are pressing us now for many years to do more for our own defense, and they are successfully, happily, and so they more and more lose their leverage about us and also about Ukraine. They don't give any more money. We buy the weapons from the US, so we are becoming more and more independent. And that's good, because we now can decide for our own, and we don't need the US anymore as an ally, as we have been dependent the last 40, 50, 60 years. So European is becoming more independent, and that I would also say with the frozen assets. I totally can understand that the US wants some money, because Trump always is triggered by money, and it's what he is really interested in. But we should be very friendly, and we should say, yes, thank you for the initiatives. Yes, of course we want peace, because we really want a long-lasting peace. If you go to Ukraine and see how many people, but this way you will reach peace. It's kind of a hybrid warfare from the Russian side, and now we need money, and the money we can get from the frozen assets. We just should continue on this path, and I think what is really interesting, and that I think is what we should learn on this issue, how clever Russia is when it comes to hybrid warfare, how clever they are dealing with our public, how well they are dealing with leaking to newspapers, how well they are dealing with different fractions within democratic countries. And I think one of the main causes for this plan is that Europe seriously is trying to use the frozen assets to help Ukraine, because that's very important. The Ukrainian defense industry could only work to 70 or 80% of its capacity because of lack of money. So if he gives this, they one day can work on 100% of their capacity. That would make a big difference. So I think we should continue on the path, talking with the US, be very friendly with the US, and becoming more and more independent with every day. And I just looked to Germany, where we have started. We started with a defense minister who was proud about 5,000 helmets, and now, not in percentage, but at least in absolute numbers, we are the strongest supporter of Ukraine. And it should be this way, because we are totally interested in this. Because I always feel ashamed when Ukrainians say, thank you about all the money you are delivering, about all the weapons. Because the Ukrainian soldiers are the ones who are fighting and dying. And they are fighting and dying for all of us, for the freedom, democracy, and security for all of us. And that we have to learn and to acknowledge, because Russia will not stop in Ukraine. It will attack further countries if it's not stopped in Ukraine. And so it's our own interest, and we should use the frozen assets to help Ukraine to produce more weapons for their own, not because we find weapons so exciting, but to be better able to defend their own citizens and all of us.
So at the next European Council meeting, they should decide to use these frozen assets, and you say this would strengthen the European position going forward. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Very short.
Very short. Then maybe I want to ask one follow-up question to you, Natalie. In short, sort of, what is Russia's interest now to continue with this? Like, what do you think is your feeling on how this will continue?
I mean, I actually think that Russia probably knows that this whole planned business is going to get nowhere. I actually think that Russia knows and wants the war to continue. I think that the war has become, increasingly is becoming, with every day that passes, existential for Russia, and not for Russia, sorry, for this Russian regime. I think the continuation of war is a prerogative of the continuation of this regime. So frankly speaking, I think that regardless of all of these diplomatic acrobatics, our working hypothesis should be one of a war that continues until this regime remains in power. And it could be tomorrow morning or it could be in 10 years, I don't know. But again, our working hypothesis is that it's going to be for the long term. If it happens tomorrow morning, we're obviously all here to open champagne bottles, but we should not be fooled. And as I said, I'm not trying to belittle the diplomacy, right? As I said, it is essential to try and mitigate, at the very least, the disasters that can be caused by a diplomatic process that is mishandled, right? So I think there's value in that. But the fact that there's value in avoiding a diplomatic disaster does not mean that we should actually believe that this is going to lead anywhere, because it's very clear that it's going to lead absolutely nowhere, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Well, since it's the working hypothesis we're discussing, my colleague Julia Ganter will discuss this question some more this afternoon at 4:50 p.m. in the session Volatile America, Vulnerable Europe. We here will turn over to our original topic, which was European cohesion, European unity. And this sort of comes up in a lot of the panels today, internal unity and cohesion are necessary, are so vital to act decisively abroad. And so now for the next 15 minutes, we will speak about the inner workings of the EU, and then I will open it to your questions. So as we all know, the EU has been diagnosed with a lack of capacity to act for several years now, and often named as one of the blocks on the road toward a more effective and efficient common foreign and security policy is always the voting system as a requirement for unanimity. So, Anton Hofreiter, Germany initiated this group of friends of the QMV in 2023. On the other hand, Germany has often been criticized for being reactive and reluctant in Brussels. The so-called German vote is a term that most of us know. So where does Germany now need to step up to achieve reforms?
I think generally Germany should avoid the so-called German vote, because when you talk to many countries, when it's not so important, many countries just has on their paper 3 words, vote like Germany. And then Germany don't know what to do. Then a lot of countries don't know what to do. So we should realize how important we are for leading the European Union. We should not tell people now everybody has to speak German, but we should realize how important the position of Germany is to lead Europe, because we are by far the most powerful country within Europe, and we are, when you look to the world, the third strongest economy of the world. And we often don't reflect this. Then when it comes to the reform of anonymity, I'm not a friend that everything should put into qualified majority, because it will never happen that, for example, the small countries of the Baltic say, oh yes, we agree. And I would not recommend it to them. But they also see, and if you speak to them, Hungary is a problem. Yes, Hungary is a problem. Often Hungary is a bigger problem because other countries could hide behind Hungary. But for example, if we would reform it in a way that the veto is only valid if, let's say, 4 countries veto on the same topic, then I think for many countries it would be able to work with it, because they still have the right to veto, but not a single country. You could say, okay, it's also impossible to do it because, again, we need Hungary to do it. Yeah, but with a lot of pressure, it may happen. And when we come to enlargement, I'm also not a friend that everything has to be reformed before we accept one single country more. Because if you look on the Western Balkans, they have waited so long. And the situation there is so dangerous because Russia, China, and also Turkey are playing a really problematic role, let it put this way. And we look to Serbia, how the situation is. So if you look at Montenegro, for a long time, we have pretended that we want to enlarge, and the countries have to pretend to reform. But countries like Montenegro or Albania are now reforming really. And they are reforming with a really high speed, also Moldova and Ukraine. So, and I think Montenegro will be ready in short time. So we have not to reform many to accept Montenegro. It's such a small country.
Exactly.
Its agriculture is so small. It's so many people. We have just one real problem, and it's a veto. So why not make a treaty with Montenegro? Look, you can be full member of the European Union with one exception. You will sign a treaty that you will not use your right to veto as long as we have not reformed it. Yes, of course, we have sent countries in a kind of way, you could say first class and second class, but to become full member just without the right to veto, I think they will take it. They will not be happy, but we can enlarge, and then other countries like Serbia and Vucic and all these authoritarian guys there see, it's not a fake that we are able to enlarge. And it would also be a good sign to Moldova and Ukraine. We are really able to enlarge. So I'm really in favor of a very pragmatic solution. And when it comes to the number of commissioners, look at the German government. We have so many people within the German government. And we already have a system in the European Commission that not every commissioner is equal. They have, yeah, you know all the titles. You can invent more titles. So it should not really a problem. So enlarge solves the problem with the veto, that you say you have only right of veto when you reform. And then as Germany and the other bigger countries, we will never be able to force through that we have qualified majority on everything. So let's reform veto in a way that it's only valid when 4 countries veto on the same issue, and then go forward, because it's in our own interest that we don't have any more gray zones within Europe. And so it's our geopolitical interest to enlarge Europe.
Is this a option seriously discussed?
Yes.
And where do we stand?
I don't know where we stand, because governments always are cautious. That's the nation of governments, especially European governments. But parliaments are pushing them to be less cautious.
Mm-hmm. As we have the privilege of having a representative of an enlargement partner here, how do you see these questions of using these pragmatic solutions in terms of the voting system?
Well, I believe that cohesion is important, but also it's important to be united again around the efficient and adequate position. Because as I mentioned already, there were examples when Europe experienced this cohesion, when we were talking about Minsk so-called agreement, yeah, which was nothing but not an agreement, but just yet another invitation for Russia to get stronger, to invest in their defense industry, and invade Ukraine with more tanks, soldiers, and atrocities. So I believe that it's also very important that now we see a changing role of Germany. And it's a big pleasure for me personally, because in Ukrainian parliament, I'm not only, dealing with defense industry or something else, I'm also is in charge of cooperation with Germany, because I'm a chair of German-Ukrainian Interparliamentary Friendship Group. I always believed in Germany as a European leader, because if, someone should be adult in the room. Someone should say, okay, it looks like we are in crisis. We are in crisis of identity. We are in crisis of where do we go. We are in crisis of how we actually assess Russian influence, various kind of influence on Europe, on world, etc., etc. And therefore, I believe that that it's very important to be united against, to have a right idea and unite around that right idea. And I believe Germany can play a great role about that. Talking about enlargement, it's a very important. It's very important sign for Ukrainian civilians that are fighting. It's not only Ukrainian army, but actually each and every Ukrainian, even small Ukrainians, are basically in this fight now. Because in my opinion, we should talk not like this war went beyond the war. When we talk about war, we usually imagine that army is fighting against army. But Russians are not fighting against Ukrainian army. They are fighting against population. Exclusively tonight, Russia has launched against civilian infrastructure, not against bases or armies or something, but against civilian infrastructure. 464 drones, 4 Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles, 7 cruise missiles, 8 cruise missiles, Caliber, 3 Iskander ballistic missiles. They murdered 7 people and wounded 20 people in Kyiv only. So it's not a war, it's genocide. And I believe that it's important to, to move forward with some lessons learned. And I'm happy that it looks like these lessons are being learned. And therefore, it's very important, not only to send these signs, but actually to follow up the signs or follow up the words or statements with actual activities, with actions. And therefore, it's important to speed, in my opinion, it's important to speed up the invitation or integration of Ukraine and Moldova, as well as Montenegro and other countries in European Union, to make sure that we are at this turning point, that we as a European, basically, family, are turning the right direction of history. And we are not, that we will not come to the point when we are deciding, Ukraine future or what part of countries or what lands Russia can take or cannot. It's important to be brave, and it's important to have adult in the room. And I believe that Germany can play this role.
Yeah, Lina. Tristan, speaking about pragmatic solutions, you've not your experience in working in Paris, but you've also worked as deputy Sherpa to the president of the European Council. So from your experience in Brussels, would you say it's now more important to reach unity as much and as often as possible between the 27, or use other tools, such as, for example, the enhanced cooperation? Maybe let me remind everyone what that tool is about. It's when the 27 member states cannot agree, 9 member states can move ahead, and procedure is also authorized by the Council, by QMV, and then after a Commission proposal, and then the European Parliament needs to consent. So, okay, now over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, first, maybe it's counterintuitive, but I'd like to nuance something that you said on the fact that Europe basically slow, divided, and so on and so forth. If we look at the past few years, I think we should not always be too self-critical on us Europeans when we look at what happened in COVID. The fact that we managed to find a common answer to this crisis was not a given, and it happened in a pretty efficient way compared to other big superpowers in the world. And in other instances, the EU has been moving pretty fast, and it's changed its mindset pretty significantly. And since the start of the war in Ukraine, I would not say that the EU has not been changing quite substantially its approach. I think what's pretty striking, if you look at the past few years, is that when events are unfolding at a critical pace and when there are new things taking place, you see that there are new formats emerging all over the place. You have the Weimar format between Germany, France, and Poland. You have the Weimar Plus. I mean, we could list all of them. You also have those formats such as the E3 that we've mentioned several times, which has a benefit of bringing together the UK, which is certainly a major security player on the European continent in spite of Brexit, which changes nothing in this respect. So I think that we've seen this proliferation of formats, which is a pragmatic answer to finding, the right coalitions, whatever the form, whatever the number of partners, but to address challenges. One such example is the Coalition of the Willing, meeting actually now at leaders level to discuss security assurances and security guarantees, to Ukraine and in supporting Ukrainian military forces, in working closely with our US counterparts, on what a force of reassurance could be. It's a format which brings together many European member states, plus the UK, plus Turkey as well, in doing things which we may not be able to do at 27, but out of pragmatism that enables us to move forward. It's not completely new. If you look at EU history, Schengen, the Euro, I mean, you have plenty of examples where basically you have groups of member states, EU, non-EU, working together, advancing on a specific topic and moving forward. And when I was working for the president of the European Council, actually my experience is that when leaders, member states start to work together to get, ahead on a specific topic, it has a benefit, beneficial consequence for the EU project as a whole. So I would not oppose, because most of the time we hear about this is fragmentation, this is small groupings. Well, I actually don't really buy that argument, because I do think that when you have smaller groupings that out of pragmatism start working together as Europeans to answer critical issues, and security guarantees to Ukraine is certainly one of them, and decide to move forward pragmatically is what we need. Final point on this, because I think formats is what diplomats like to talk about, but on substance, I think that when it comes to the perception of the Russian threat, we've come a long way among Europeans, because what prevents European member states to work together structurally is the fact that we have different perceptions of threats affecting each and every state. But now you can see that there is a very strong convergence in all European capitals in assessing the structural Russian threats and that it poses to European security. And when I just look at what happened in Paris, where we had a process to adopt our strategic national strategic review, the central scenario is a major confrontation with Russia by 2030. I think this is very similar to the diagnosis being posed in German strategic thinking at the moment. And as Germany is about to adopt its national security strategy, there is space, I think, for growing convergence around those stakes. So I think converging strategically and then finding the pragmatic formats to advance together. But I think that this dynamic in itself is fueling further European action.
Mm-hmm. I have one more question to Natalie Tocci, and then I open it to your questions. So prepare yourselves. Natalie, if we talk about European unity and cohesion, of course, we have to also go beyond these more technical questions and pragmatic questions and sort of look at narratives about the EU as well and sort of its capacity to integrate more. And in the past, if I look at interviews with you from the last couple of years, you argued several times that sort of the reaction to COVID, to the war of aggression in Ukraine, sort of helped to integrate the EU more. So I was also seeing that in this year's Eurobarometer, it shows that the trust in the EU is at the highest ever result, and sort of that the respondents say their country has benefited from being a member of the EU. It was 74%, which is a very, very large number. So how can the EU best use this moment?
Okay, so I used to be an optimist. I used to be an optimist in the sense that I used to really believe in a sense, the sort of Monet method, if you like, and using crises to make a leap forward in integration each and every time. And indeed, I think, you know, COVID and particularly the first year, I would say, of the war in Ukraine were a testimony to that, right? And then actually I lost that faith. I lost that faith, and indeed, if, you know, those of you who have kind of read me or listened to me, particularly over the last, I would say, year and a half, I've kind of become what probably many would define as being a pessimist. And I've kind of really been struggling with this question. Oh my God, Natalie, you've become really dark here, and, you know, you've become a pessimist. I've been having a bit of an identity crisis. And then I kind of had a thought, and I guess it was partly to make myself feel better about it. And the thought was as follows. Actually, the optimists are pessimists if what we mean by optimism is more of the same, right? And given that we have, you know, found solutions from crises, we're going to keep on doing this forever. I actually don't believe that that is the case. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's what we're doing at the moment. But maybe pessimists are optimists if they deep down have a belief that we can do something significantly different from what we have done in the past. And I think that some of the things that we've been hearing actually go in this direction. I don't think it's just the product of pragmatism, the fact that you have groups of countries coming together. And I think that it's, on the one hand, an implicit recognition that the structures that we have will not be the ones that will find the solution. Actually, this applies both to the EU and to NATO, I would argue. And that the formats that are emerging are perhaps a pragmatic response, but based, I think, on a convergence of principle. And the convergence of principle is indeed that amongst this critical mass of European governments and institutions and societies, there is an increasingly shared threat perception. There is an increasing sense of a shared future. So maybe I'm actually not pessimistic at all. I'm just kind of, you know, pessimistic if one thinks of pessimism as assuming that it is the old that can be renewed. I think that that world has gone. I think that that EU has gone. I think that that NATO has gone. But maybe I'm not being pessimistic at all in thinking that if one actually thinks that there is a kind of, you know, day after, there is a future after, as a consequence of all of this.
Wonderful. What a last comment before the rounds of questions. Okay, over to you. I see, let me start over here with one of our Munich young leaders.
Hi, Joel Linnamäki from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. First of all, thank you for the amazing panel. And without delving too deep into the definition of optimism, I wanted to thank you, Natalie, for your optimism on assessing the most likely outcome of the talks in Geneva and Abu Dhabi are that there will be no outcome out of the peace process so far. But how would you assess one major risk, which kind of relates to your point about the Europeans going to Trump and asking him kindly to step aside, and that risk is, of course, Trump getting frustrated and walking away from the entire process, cutting off intelligence sharing to Ukraine and cutting off the Europeans from buying ammunition weapons to Ukraine. Thank you.
I'm going to take some more questions. The lady in the blue, yes.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Oksana Antonenko from European University Institute. Thank you, Natalie. I'm actually on the same question to continue your provocation, very interesting one. Isn't the risk here, if we go to Trump and say that, you know, he should just take a pause, is that he actually then join forces with Putin, which seems to be what he's actually doing, not only in the 28th point plan, but more generally with his vision for European security, as was discussed before, you know, and how can we influence that if we are not with him somehow at the table? And then I guess the following question is, we already have an experience with Normandy process where France and Germany were leading the negotiations on Ukraine, and that wasn't exactly a glaring success. So how do you think the negotiations should be structured, provided we have no channel into Russia now at all, and no making of the Russia strategy on the European side?
I have one more question here, Peter Frey, and then I've seen one more question over there, and then we give it back to the panel.
Thank you for the interesting panel. Peter Frey from the Körber Foundation. I have two questions regarding the relationship with the US. This morning we heard the question to the Foreign Secretary, how could that happen, that we didn't know about the plan? Who should we ask? Should we ask the American president, or should we ask ourselves? How could we happen that we have not been at Mar-a-Lago, that we left this guy alone and let him invite Russian negotiators into his administration and make up this plan? But why aren't we closer to this administration to avoid these things? Yeah. And my second question would be, you said that this war could go on for maybe 10 years, but are you sure that our people, that the voters in Europe will support it? I mean, with AfD maybe winning one of the elections next year in Eastern Germany, and we don't know what will happen in France too. So isn't that the danger that Russia will win the hybrid war while losing on the battleground?
Yeah. Sorry, there was one more question back there, which I didn't see earlier. So
thank you very much, Cornelius Adebar. I'm with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and it is a perfect segue to Peter's question. I want to dive a little bit deeper into the internal cohesion and democratic resilience part of the panel description. And I thought the introduction you did on the so-called peace plan was actually quite a good illustration of how information warfare can be led against us, because someone obviously very much read the information environment around the White House or in the United States. And we haven't done that. So my question is, we talk a little bit more about hybrid threats these days and information warfare, but have we understood what it means to live in an information environment where information is being manipulated, not just from abroad, but also at the domestic front and at the technological level that we hardly grasp? The latest being X now saying where people sit when they post something, revealing that already in 2016 it was places far from the United States that influenced the debate there. So this is my question. Thank you.
And please give the microphone to this gentleman over here. Yes.
Thank you. This is Ismail Cvelik. I'm the head of Department of the Balkans from Turkish Foreign Ministry. And first, I would like to thank you for this thought-provoking discussion. I will start with two remarks and one question in the end. So I think it's better when we talk about the future of European something, we have to approach this issue from the perspective of Europe, not just limiting it to the European Union. And secondly, it's so preposterous to put Turkey in the same category with Russia and China, because whether it is Ukraine or Balkans, so if you need a stability, so you have to include Turkey. For example, we are one of the most contributing states to E4 in Bosnia-Herzegovina and commanding force of KFOR. So my question is, do you think that it is sustainable or realistic to talk about European defense system underutilizing the capacities of NATO and some important actors, non-EU ones, such as Turkey and the United Kingdom, for example? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So now with this bouquet of questions, I would hand it back to the panel. I would start with you, Natalie, as several of the questions were directed to you, and then give all the panel to give a chance to wrap it up.
Okay, so what if Trump says no? Okay, so let me put it in these terms. I think it is not very realistic at all, for reasons that I'll come to in a second, to think that we can actually persuade Trump to buy into a Ukrainian-European approach. I think that that is not realistic. I don't think it's a steady state. I think it is realistic to see a scenario in which there is a Russia-US bilateral agreement with the war continuing, and Europeans and Ukrainians persuading Trump to not exactly do God knows what, yeah? I mean, like, make money by selling us weapons, and he's not going to say no to that. And, as I said, very generously keeping on providing intelligence. I think that that is within reach, and I think that that is what we should be aiming for. Then, of course, if we get to the miracle of getting, you know, MAGA to fall in love with Europe, fantastic. I don't think that that's possible, which leads me to my second very brief point, which is, would it have made a difference if we had gone to Mar-a-Lago? We're not invited to Mar-a-Lago. It's not like we have not been trying to have access to the Trump administration. It's not like we've not been trying to have access to the kind of, you know, deep core of MAGA. They hate our guts. Yeah, I don't know if it's clear to us by now, yeah? And so there's a reason why this has not happened, and I think that we should acknowledge it. Can we resist? I think that this is indeed, I mean, okay, can we resist for 10 years? Of course, militarily, yes. Of course, even in terms of the, in a sense, hybrid bit, also yes. The politics of it is, and to be honest, this is the most successful part of Russia's strategy and the US's strategy, as in the Trump administration strategy. This is indeed, I think, the real question mark. And in a sense, I call it the reverse J.D. Vance threat. Yeah, it's the threat from within, but it's of a very different kind to the one that the vice president mentioned in Munich several months ago.
Tristan, you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you. Just a very, very quick points. First, on the hybrid war, I think that as European states, we need to up the game very strongly in the sense that the level of aggressiveness that we're witnessing in the information space, but not only when it comes to sabotage, when it comes to actions to destabilize our societies, I think we need to be much, much, much stronger in, you know, declassifying things, attributing those attacks, changing the narrative, and being much more forceful in denouncing the level of aggressiveness that's being deployed at the very heart of our societies. Second, I think it's also important, and coming back to the point on perception of threat, to share much more widely with our public the level of, you know, increase in Russian defense spending, the level of production that they are following at the moment, and just to demonstrate that basically what they're after is pretty large and significant and going beyond what we're witnessing now. So second point, very briefly, on the negotiation process. Just one point that we've not made, but I think the past few days show to what extent it's important, of course, to engage with the White House, and we're doing it in many European capitals on a daily basis, but also other actors in the US system. I'm thinking about Congress, I'm thinking about US businesses, because frankly, when I hear about normalization of US-Russia relations, economically speaking, I'd be curious to know what's the feeling of US businesses in this respect. And final point, very briefly on Turkey, just to say that actually the coalition of the willing I referred to earlier on is precisely a format which enables us to work with UK and Turkey, and that's precisely the idea, because as has been said, these are certainly critical players in European security as part of NATO, and I think that, coming back to my point on pragmatism and agility, now is the time also to go beyond existing formats.
And then can you comment on the questions on internal cohesion, and could we go on for 10 years?
I think we could go on for several time, and I also agree with it that the hybrid threat, and especially the right-wing pro-Russian extremists and some left-wing pro-Russian extremists are the biggest danger for us. It's even much bigger than the weapons, and we have to realize this, and we have to fight against it. I think it's ridiculous that in the Defense Committee of the German Bundestag, there are in the end members of a party who are traitors and who are agents of the Russian enemy. It's ridiculous. And I think in Germany we have to learn to deal with it and to understand that we cannot allow our enemies to be in the heart of our parliament. So we have to act on it.
Exactly.
And I will take a question on Normandy and in general as our lesson learned. So I also believe that Normandy process as well as Minsk was not very efficient, and it did not lead to the end of the war. And this should be our lesson learned in this round of negotiation. Why Normandy was not a success, if not to say it's a failure, although there was, also European leaders. I believe their fault was that they pressed wrong party. So they tried to actually press Ukraine. The Normandy process was in favor for Russia. So it was not fair, and therefore it was not sustainable. And it was encouraging for Russia. And that's why Russia came again with the war. But there is another reason why Normandy was not a success. Russia does not understand and does not respect a language of democracy, language of negotiations, etc., etc. They only understand one language of force. They only respect those who are strong. And therefore, I want to send this kudos to our Turkish colleagues. Actually, there was one example when NATO country was, standing against the Russian. It was Turkey in 2015. Although Turkey is also a NATO country, there was no any Article 5 used or anything. But Russia, back in 2014 and 15, was systematically violating the borders of Turkey when they were actually messing up in Syria. Nowadays, Russia systematically violates the borders of various European countries, like Finland, like Sweden, like Polish, like Germany, like etc., etc., etc. What is the reaction of European countries? Nothing. Just, closing the eyes. This is a very infantile position. That's how kids react on the danger. They close their eyes and believe that, danger is out. How Turkey reacted on Russia in 2015. There were 3 violations of the border in September and October. And when there was a 4th violation, Turkey said, okay, that's enough. If you don't get away from our, territories, we will fight your military, basically your military jets. And they did it. So 2 military jets of Russian were put down in Turkey in 2015. Guess how many times Russia has violated the borders of Turkey after 2015? Let it be our lessons learned and something that we move forward with.